Important events in U.S. history. In this chapter we will discuss important events in U.S. history. We are uncovering these events in brief from the book History, American History in 50 Events, from First Immigration to World Power by James Weber. 1776 Declaration of Independence. On July 4, 1776 Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. It was a document severed ties between Britain and the colonies. It is one of the foundational documents of American government. 1781 Battle of Yorktown. From September 28 to October 19, 1781, American troops surrounded Yorktown, Virginia. General Cornwallis was there with his army. British army surrendered. War did not end till 1783 until the Treaty of Paris was signed. It was the last major battle in American Revolution. America finally gained international acknowledgement as an independent nation. 1789 First President. George Washington became the first president. He was the prominent war hero of independence. He got 100% of electoral votes. He brought dignity and humility to the office. He was not a member of any political party. He served for 2 terms. 1791 First Bank of USA. In 1791, George Washington laid the foundation of First Bank of the United States to provide credit to American government and other nations. It provided government with adequate funds to operate. The creation of bank created controversies. People were divided between Federalists who supported the bank and Anti-Federalists who were against it. 1803 Purchase of Louisiana. Louisiana was purchased from France. The U.S. bought it for $15 million. A total of 828,000 sq miles were acquired. France had control over a small area. The USA bought it to take control of the whole area by Indians either by force or by treaty. 1812 War. After French Revolution, Napoleon instituted a trade embargo known as the Continental System to weaken Britain. Due to this, British economy suffered greatly. In order to regain its power, Britain decided to take on the U.S. Britain did not want a military conflict, but the U.S. misunderstood and declared war. Most of the war was minor skirmishes. But due to U.S. Navy failure, British were able to sail up the Potomac River and burn White House. 1836 Battle of Alamo. It lasted from 23 February to 6 March 1836. It happened near modern-day San Antonio. It ensured Texan independence and later inclusion with U.S. The Alamo was an 18th-century Franciscan mission. Mexican dictator Antonio Lopez won the battle, but it created hatred in Texans against Mexico, which later fueled the Texas independence. 1849 California Gold Rush. James W. Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California. The news broke out and brought about 300,000 people in California in search of gold. The gold rush gave a huge boost to the economy. Due to population influx, California got its status from territory to state. Population influx also resulted in population decline of Indians. 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. Slavery issue divided the whole nation. Kansas and Nebraska were not part of Union and became a battleground for it. Congress decided to give sovereignty to each territory to decide. This was later known as Kansas-Nebraska Act, allowing states to decide internally. Despite the intentions of Congress, this act created great violence and the conflict later called Bleeding Kansas. This was the leading factor of the 1861 American Civil War. 1861 The Civil War. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln became the president. Because Lincoln was against slavery, first South Carolina, and then later Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas and Mississippi declared their secession from the Union. These states formed the Confederacy and chose Jefferson Davis as their president. The Confederacy attacked the Fort Sumter in South Carolina. In response, Lincoln sent troops to recapture the fort. From this point till 1965, there were blood conflicts. But at the end of war, slavery was abolished and supremacy of national government above states was established. 1863 Emancipation Proclamation issued. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation Proclamation freed all the slaves and allowed them to join the Union Army to fight against the Confederate. It freed the slaves which were fighting against the Union. It was an executive order and later reversed by Dred Scott. It was first step in providing civil rights to African American. 1865 Abraham Lincoln assassinated. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, bringing war to an end. After the end of the war, the Union began to celebrate the victory. As a part of victory, Lincoln chose to attend play, Our American Cousin. During the play, a Confederate supported John Wilkes, who was an actor assassinated by Lincoln. Lincoln died early morning on April 15. After Lincoln's death, his Vice President Andrew Johnson took the presidency and resumed the Reconstruction. 1870 Standard Oil Company created. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller created the Standard Oil Company. It became the largest refiner in the world. It created a new way of business, horizontal integration. Rockefeller became the richest man in America due to the fact his company controlled 90% of the oil business. In 1911, the Standard Oil Corporation was broken up. 1876 Telephone invented. In 1876, Graham Bell, who first patented an electrical telephone in 1876. Its invention revolutionized communication and American way of life. Distances were reduced between major cities. 1892 Homestead Strike. Carnegie revolutionized the steel industry with increasingly advanced technology which required less workers. He tried to hire less skilled workers at lesser pay, which fueled iron workers at Homestead Steel Plant. They went on strike from June 30 to July 6, which resulted in gunfight, killing 16 people. This had the repel effect on all unions and improved workers' and labor's rights. 1898 Spanish-American War. In 1890, Spain violated several human rights in Cuba, which was its territorial possession then. At the request of Cuba, U.S. sent aid to them. When the American ship, the USS Maine, exploded, U.S. declared war on Spain. The Spanish were outmanned and outgunned and thus surrendered. U.S. got both Cuba and the Philippines from Spain. It was first time when U.S. showed its military superpower. 1917 America enters World War I. U.S. refrained from the war during first few years. When the U.S. became aware of German-sponsored potential invasion of Texas by Mexico, the U.S. entered the war in 1917. American soldiers were less skilled, but their passion boosted their allies. After the end of war, U.S. advocated a strategy of rebuilding Germany as an ally, but France demanded punishment. 1920 Women win right to vote. Several states already had rights for white women, which became national in 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified. 1929 stock market crash and Great Depression. 1920s many investors invested their money with great risks, giving credit to those who could not afford in common. Due to inflation caused by the overextension of credit, the Roaring Twenties came to a drastic halt on October 24, 1929. On this date the stock market crashed and the economy evaporated overnight. Banks were not able to meet the demand of withdrawals and the Great Depression began. It was even worsened by drought in Midwest, which is known as Dust Bowl. About 25% of the workforce was laid off. It was a time of great despair, starvation and hopelessness. 1933 New Deal begins. On March 4, 1933 Franklin D. Roosevelt took oath as president and started the recovery of the economy. FDR undertook a series of reform, which came to known as New Deal. It provided work for those who did not have work otherwise in infrastructure projects and making America beautiful. Some people built roads and bridges and others maintained national parks. New Deal sought to protect the most vulnerable. Social Security was created. 1941 Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. World War II broke out when Germany invaded Poland. U.S. again kept itself out of the conflict. Due to America's embargo of Japan, Japanese attacked America in hope that it would end the embargo. On December 7, 1941 at 7:48 Japanese bombers attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This attack led to America's entrance into World War II when Congress declared war on both Japan and Germany. During the war, U.S. demonstrated their modern warfare. 1945 Use of first atomic bomb. After the defeat of Germany in World War II, U.S. turned its force towards Japan. Due to religious and militaristic Japanese culture, America struggled against Japan. American strategists estimated that Japanese invasion will cost millions of American lives. In order for Japan to surrender, America decided to use their secretly developed atomic weapon. They dropped the first bomb on the city of Hiroshima, killing about 146,000 people, giving an ultimatum to stop the war, and then dropping another one on August 9 in Nagasaki, killing 80,000 people. After this, Japan surrendered and war ended. 1947 Truman Doctrine. After the Second World War, a Cold War began between forces of communism and capitalism. On March 2, 1947, Truman addressed a full session of Congress to aid Turkey and Greece, which were threatened by communist takeover. This address became known as Truman Doctrine, which suggested that America will help any country to remain free from communism. Secretary of State George Marshall gave an address in which he suggested to help any country recover from World War II, which later known as Marshall Plan. 1955 Rosa Parks and the bus boycott. America was helping allies to build, but social inequality was at its peak in the 1950s despite African American services in the war. African American were not allowed to use the same drinking fountain, attend the same schools or sit in preferential seats. On December 1 in Birmingham, Alabama, Rosa Parks was traveling on the bus and asked to vacate a seat for white passengers, which she denied. Police were called on her, which led to African American boycott of the bus service until the changes of laws in 1956. This served as a milestone to tackle racial inequality. 1963 JFK was assassinated. In 1961, JFK became the youngest president of USA. He was on his political tour in Dallas, Texas, where he was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. He killed JFK because he hated capitalism. 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. The law abolished the national origins formula. This law removed discrimination against non-European nations for immigration and provided more diversity. 1968 Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. In the 1960s, the U.S. were fighting equal integration of African Americans in the society. Various violent and non-violent groups were active. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the non-violent activists. On April 4, 1968, King was assassinated in his hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. 1969 Moon landing. In the 1960s, there was a space race between Russia and the U.S. to land on the moon first, which the U.S. won when the first human landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon. The whole world watched this event. 1975 Vietnam War ends. As a result of Truman Doctrine, America entered Vietnam to support capitalists against communists from 1955 to 1975. Most U.S. citizens were against the conflict, including Muhammad Ali. In 1975, the Communist forces of North Vietnam overran the capitalistic South Vietnam, unifying the country under Communist banner. 1991 First Gulf War in Iraq. During the Cold War, the U.S. helped every country against communism. So many countries were in friendship with the U.S. which otherwise they would not. When the Cold War ended, Iraq ended its friendship with the U.S. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait for its expensive oil. In order to protect Kuwait, the U.S. helped Kuwait, and it was retaken from Iraq. Saddam Hussein remained in power until the United States invaded the country in 2003. 2001 9/11 terrorist attack. On September 11, 2001, a terrorist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 American aircraft and used them to destroy World Trade Center Twin Towers. The 4th plane was believed to be headed towards the White House but was recaptured by passengers and crushed into a field in Pennsylvania. In these attacks, around 3,000 people were killed. After this, the U.S. launched the War on Terror, which started in Afghanistan. 2007 The Great Recession begins. In the 2000s, the U.S. was in a great economic boom which resulted in investors taking inappropriate risk. Mortgage loans were given to people who could not afford. As a result of these actions, the U.S. saw a huge drop in the housing market in mid-2007 along with a massive drop in the financial market. Lessons learned from the Great Depression helped the U.S. government to recover quickly. 10% of the U.S. workforce was laid off. 2008 First African American president. In 2008, Barack Obama became the first African American president. He became popular among Democrats, pushing behind Hillary Clinton. He went on to serve for 2 terms.